Hey YouTube, I hope that all is going well. So when my brother and I were younger, we had this friend named John, and for a time he was our best friend. We did everything together. We'd play in the treehouse that all the neighborhood kids helped build, we made Lego movies, we had sleepovers, you know, all that fun stuff. On more than one occasion, my brother and I asked John to come with us to church, to VBS, to youth group, and he always resisted. And so one time I flat out asked him, "Hey man, what's up? Why don't you want to come?" And I will never forget that really sad look in his eyes as he formulated his answer. He explained that his parents were in the middle of a divorce, and he asked, if God is so good, why is my life so bad? This was the first time I had ever been confronted about the problem of evil. You know, we were only 12 or 13 years old at the time, but I think that a lot of people in every age group wrestle with this. How can an all-knowing, all-loving God allow suffering? If God is so good, why is the world so bad? If God knows everything, why does he allow evil to happen? I think the reason the problem of evil is so universal is because we all feel it, we experience it. From my personal experience, there are 3 steps to handling the problem of evil.
Greetings and welcome there, people of YouTube. This is Lessons of 4 here doing another video response to State of Daniel on his video, Why Does God Allow Bad Things to Happen? Which, as he just introduced now, we'll be discussing the whole problem of evil. So with that out of the way, let us get on with it.
Number 1, we have to remember that evil isn't a thing. I used to envision evil as darkness or this brooding spiritual entity, but the reality is that these mental images are a little misleading.
Well, no shit. They're called abstract nouns, or the fact that they are used to discuss an abstract sense or feeling of something. It can refer to actions or events or even a type of person based off their personality. You know, nobody ever claims that evil was a physical entity, especially not the critics of religion. We just use metaphors and similes in literature as it helps explain a general sense or feeling.
You see, God created everything, and everything God created is good.
What, even cancer? HIV? The Black Plague? Fox News? The fact is that good is another abstract noun. It's no different to evil. It doesn't physically exist. Removing the latter off that list I just gave, however, and you have what are sometimes termed as natural evils, i.e. ones which are not inflicted by people yet still physically and emotionally have damaging consequences. I need to stress this point of natural evil for later on, so keep hold of it.
If we view evil as a thing, then we naturally blame God for its existence. Instead, we need to remember that evil isn't a thing, it's a wrong choice. It's the consequences of a wrong choice. It's only when the world chooses sin and selfishness that evil is allowed to manifest.
Well, if that's so, then why do down-on-the-knees devout Christians get cancer as much as the rest of the population? This counter-argument only really alludes to the idea of synthetic evil, i.e. human-inflicted evil. Also, why does God have to allow this evil to occur? You say it's due to choice, however, when did the raped ever choose to get sexually violated? I admit this is begging the question for the fact that raped is defined as not giving consent to sexual intercourse, therefore, yeah, the question was a trick one. However, I hope it makes a point. You could just argue that it was the violator's choice that allowed evil to enter the world, yet how is the raped individual responsible for this? You'll go on to discuss free will in a second, but it's important to point this fact out. By allowing a person to be raped, surely God is accepting that the free will of the rapist supersedes that of the raped victim. It seems there's a major blind spot in your argument here.
Now, there are going to be some people out there who say, if God is the origin of free will and free will creates room for sin, then can't we blame God for evil? No.
Yeah, I'm just going to hijack another theistic argument here for a second and offer you an analogy. If we imagine we had a watchmaker who, surprise, surprise, made watches. Yet in each of his watches, he consciously adds a feature that enables the watch to spontaneously get the time wrong. Reminder, he added it in full knowledge of the consequences of putting in this mechanic. What would happen is you would go back to the watchmaker, demand your money back, and find a competent watchmaker. That's exactly the same as what you're claiming here.
Think of it this way, you wouldn't blame parents for the choices of their children, even though they're the origin of their children, right?
Daniel, what rock have you lived under for the last, well, I don't know, your entire life? Yeah, we often seek a source to a problem in a person's past. The very first place we usually go is the childhood or their family background. It may not always be the case that this is what caused them to commit a crime, but it is a place we scrutinize. So, yeah, the fact is, with this real-life scenario, there are extraneous variables to consider. However, this analogy both fails in the fact that it shows your ignorance of society, as just explained now, but also in the way that you claim your God is all-powerful. Therefore, unlike the family who can't stop exterior influence on their children, for example through peers, through the media, the workplace, education, etc., your God could supposedly do anything. When you claim a perfect God, I expect a perfect God. That's the whole point of claiming a perfect God, is that you should be able to match this defining feature. However, nothing we have discussed is in agreement with that.
You wouldn't blame the Wright brothers for 9/11 just because they're the origin of airplanes. You wouldn't blame eating utensils for obesity.
Because these people had no power to stop said evils. Now, if they designed a plane that spontaneously exploded, or utensils from a toxic metal, and they did so consciously of the effects and deliberately, then yes, they would be to blame in these situations. It's all about the amount of power Party X has. You claim a perfect God, I expect perfect results. Going back to my earlier analogy, the watch should match the skill of the watchmaker, if you will.
Yes, God is the origin of free will, but it's the people who make evil choices that deserve the blame.
Rather, you just blame people for being all they could ever be by apparent design. If the inventors of a specific aircraft designed it to explode spontaneously at a random point, would that be the pilot's fault or the engineer's fault?
Number 2, not all suffering is bad, and God actually uses suffering for good.
Not all suffering is bad, ergo, not all suffering is evil, ergo, this is completely irrelevant to the topic of the video. If you're going to go and discuss things that aren't necessarily classed as evil, and discuss them as if they were evil, and point out how they're not evil, well done. What's your point?
The fallacy that a lot of people make is that if they can't see or imagine a good reason for something, there must not be one. But this sort of mindset is blind faith of the highest order.
No, it's not, as it's up to you to show me the justification for the suffering prior to us accepting that there is a reason. Could you imagine if someone went out, say, a member of the medical field, and started hacking limbs off, and then claimed that they had a reason to do so? Would the medical committee go, "Oh, well, we can't disprove that he didn't have a reason to do so. Let's let him off." No. I mean, the fact is he should have gone and talked to the ethical committee beforehand. So, yeah. You fail philosophically and pragmatically. That's just the way it is, man. Also, what is a good reason for letting a child die a slow and painful death of leukemia? I want to hear you give me a justification for that. What about natural disasters? Thousands die, and for what? The only good that could possibly come from this is that sometimes it unites nations together. And may I remind you that God hates nations uniting together, as is shown from the Tower of Babel in Genesis. God hates cooperation, so that certainly can't be his reason.
Think of the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors. You know, his brothers threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery. He was brought into a foreign land, pleaded to God for help, but he was still forced into bondage and misery. No one would have blamed Joseph had he abandoned his faith or blamed God for his suffering, but instead he allowed these trials to refine his character, and his masters noticed, and because of this, Joseph rose to become the Prime Minister of Egypt. As Prime Minister, Joseph would save thousands, including his own family, from starvation. But Joseph would have never become an agent for social change if it weren't for his suffering and if it weren't for his brothers betraying him and throwing him into a pit. From our vantage point, we can see that a lot of good came from Joseph's suffering, so who's to say what God can see?
Oh, come on, Daniel. If you're going to start a biblical story, you should end the biblical story, because the Jews were then apparently taken into slavery, as you should know, disregarding the fact that there is zero archaeological evidence for their being there at the time, so that your God could have a dick-showing contest in plaguing the whole of Egypt, including the innocent, and even slaughtered every single firstborn child. Yeah, I can see why you'd want to cut that part out of your story. Want to know what's worse? The Pharaoh repeatedly wanted to let them go, and even did let them go. And the Bible clearly states that God hardened the Pharaoh's heart. He fucked with the Pharaoh's free will so he could slaughter children. I'd like you to explain the justification of this.
Animals hardly understand anything about us or our nature, so how much more are we unable to understand everything about God's perspective?
Exactly. We're ignorant of the divine and thus cannot be blamed for our own ignorance. If a wild animal kills, say, a child, we don't view it as evil, for it's amoral and has no understanding of our ethics. If, however, there is a divine creator that does understand, or apparently understands ethics, which creates said wild animal with the specific purpose intended of killing a small child, then yeah, it ceases to be amoral.
Now, let's say that you accept my first 2 points. God didn't create evil, and perhaps there's some good that comes out of suffering. You might still be mad at God. No one is grateful for their tragedies. You might even be angry and say that God isn't off the hook for the evil in this world. And that leads to point number 3.
Before that, let me just state I am not angry at your God, and that is not the intention of this argument. You see, this argument is intended to show the internal inconsistency of the definition of your deity, thus refuting it via paradox before it enters the hypothetical arena. Your God cannot be all-loving, all-knowing, and all-powerful in this universe. You have to drop at least one of those qualifying factors to even make him plausible.
Which is that God suffered too. Atheists and those who wrestle with the problem of evil are actually right. God is not off the hook for the evil and suffering in this world.
No, he was put to a minor inconvenience for 3 days, which, by the way, to a timeless entity, is a concept that has no meaning.
But we need to take it another step further. God is the hook, and that's why we lay our burdens on the cross. As a Christian, I believe that all things work together for good, and that I can find hope and peace in Jesus Christ. We can never fully understand why God allows evil and suffering to exist in this world, but when we look at the cross, we're reminded that God loved us so much, and that He takes our suffering so seriously that He took it upon Himself. When we embrace these teachings, we're reminded that God is with us, even during the most difficult and trying times of our lives. I've come to accept this promise, and I hope you do too.
Your God sacrificed Himself to appease Himself, and that's supposed to be your clincher in this argument. That's just absurdity to the highest level. So that's 3 for 3 arguments, or should I say points, now added to the scrap heap. You really just don't seem to be able to formulate a good argument. They just don't stand to scrutiny. I mean, at the end you practically went, "It's right just because." That doesn't get you past me. So yeah, that's the end of the video. I hope you guys have enjoyed. If you'd like to support my work, then please check out my Patreon and think about donating and helping me keep going. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share on Facebook and Twitter. It really does help when you do share this video on the social media. Also, yeah, if you'd like to check out my Facebook and Twitter, feel free to do so. I do post updates now and then. So, yeah, this is Essence of Thought. Hoping you're all doing well. Take care and out.